I've spent most of my life in the dense, mist-laden forests of Northwood County, a stretch of untamed wilderness where towering pines stretch endlessly toward the sky, and shadows cling to every clearing. My father always warned me to respect the land, not just for its dangers, the unpredictable terrain, the sudden sinkholes, but for something older, something unseen that lurked beneath the canopy. "The woods remember," he'd say, "and sometimes they take things back." 2 years ago, during deer season, I had an experience that shook me so deeply, I still struggle to speak of it. It was mid-November, and the air was thick with the weight of an oncoming snowfall. My cousin, Ryan, and I had set up in separate tree stands about a mile apart, scanning the underbrush for movement. The stillness of the afternoon was almost suffocating. No wind, no distant hum of life, just an eerie quiet that set my teeth on edge. Then I saw her. She was standing just beyond a grove of pines, barely 30 yards away. A young woman dressed in a crimson coat, too bright for someone walking through hunting territory alone. She moved strangely, almost dreamlike, her steps slow and meandering, as if she were lost. I raised my rifle scope for a better look, expecting to see a panicked expression, the wild eyes of someone desperate for help. But her face was blank, empty, emotionless. Something was wrong. I climbed down from my stand as quietly as I could, calling out to her in a firm but gentle voice. "Ma'am, you all right? You lost?" She didn't react, didn't even flinch. I moved closer, keeping my gun lowered but ready. The cold bit at my skin, but I barely noticed. My pulse pounded as I stepped over a fallen log, nearing where she had been standing. She was gone. No movement, no sound, just emptiness. A chill that had nothing to do with the temperature crawled up my spine. I looked down, expecting to see footprints in the frosty grass. Nothing, not a single mark where she had stood. I backed away, my heart hammering against my ribs. A rustling noise came from behind me. I spun, gripping my rifle tightly, but the woods were empty. That night back at the cabin, I told Ryan what I'd seen. He scoffed at first, blaming exhaustion or a trick of the light. But then I saw something flicker in his eyes, recognition. He hesitated before muttering, "You saw her too." Ryan explained that over the years, hunters, hikers, and even loggers had reported glimpsing a woman in a red coat wandering the woods, always silent, always vanishing before anyone could reach her. Some said she was the spirit of a woman who had disappeared decades ago, lost in a blizzard that swallowed her whole. Others whispered darker things, about the forest itself, about how it could hold on to souls like it did the roots and bones buried beneath the soil. I didn't sleep that night. The last time I saw her, I was on the trail to my tree stand just before dawn. She was there, standing in my path, her pale face devoid of life. This time, I didn't move. I didn't call out. I just watched. She blinked once, then, like mist in the morning light, she faded away. I never went hunting in Northwood County again. Some things belong to the forest, and some things should never be followed. The phantom screams of Black Hollow hunting has always been my solace. After 2 brutal Tobers overseas, the silence of the forest is the only thing that brings me peace. My hunting partner, who I'll call Dax, served in the same unit. We bonded over our shared roots in the Northeast, our scars from war, and our mutual love for the wilderness. Every fall, we take a week off from our jobs, our lives, and the noise of civilization to hunt deep in the Black Hollow wilderness. This particular November, we set up camp near the base of Ironwood Ridge, a stretch of land known for its strong deer population and its ghost stories. The locals speak of strange disappearances, eerie sounds, and hunters who never return. Dax and I laughed off the tales, confident in our own experiences with real horrors. After all, nothing in these woods could be worse than what we'd seen in combat, or so we thought. 2 days into the trip, a cold front swept in. Snow dusted the ground, making tracking easier but hunting more difficult. We split up mid-morning, planning to meet at a pre-designated rendezvous point by early afternoon. I moved carefully through a dense grove of skeletal maples, rifle at the ready, when I spotted movement about 80 yards ahead. I raised my scope, expecting to see a buck. Instead, my breath caught in my throat. A figure hung from an old oak tree, a human. Lowering my rifle, I moved forward cautiously. As I neared, the details became clearer. The body was that of a man, his clothes in tatters, his skin shriveled and decayed. He had been there for weeks, maybe longer. The noose around his neck swayed gently in the wind, but something about the scene felt wrong. The forest was silent, not just quiet, completely, unnaturally silent. No birds, no wind, just me and the dead. I grabbed my radio. "Dax, get to my location, now!" His response was immediate. "What's wrong?" "I found a body, hanging. Give me your location." I rattled off directions, my eyes locked on the hanging corpse. Something about it held me captive in a way I couldn't explain. A deep gnawing instinct told me not to look away. Dax arrived within 10 minutes, panting from the sprint. His eyes widened as he took in the body. "Jesus, we need to call this in." I nodded, already reaching for my phone. That's when Dax grabbed my arm. "Wait, look." I followed his gaze back to the tree. The rope was still there, swinging gently in the wind. But the body was gone. "Did you see that?" My voice came out barely above a whisper. Dax's face had lost all color. "It just disappeared." We looked down at the snow-covered ground, expecting to see a collapsed body, but there was nothing. No footprints, no disturbance in the snow, nothing at all. A chill, much colder than the wind, ran through me. My fingers shook as I stuffed my phone back into my pocket. Before I could process what had just happened, the silence was shattered by a scream. A woman's scream, high-pitched, agonizing. It came from somewhere to our right. Another scream answered from the left, then another from behind us. Within seconds, the entire forest erupted with the sound of wailing women, dozens of them, surrounding us. "Move!" Dax bellowed. We ran. Branches clawed at my arms. Snow crunched beneath our boots. The screams followed us, rising in volume, merging into a deafening cacophony. The sound wasn't just loud. It was inside me, vibrating in my bones, shaking my skull. It reminded me of the aftermath of an explosion, the kind of agony that stays with you forever. I gripped my rifle, but instinct told me it was useless. Whatever this was, bullets weren't going to stop it. We sprinted through the trees, our only focus on reaching the clearing where we had parked our truck. The screams grew louder, closer, suffocating. My vision blurred with panic, but I didn't stop running. I didn't dare look back. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the screaming stopped. Not gradually, not fading, just gone. Dax and I stumbled into the open field by the forest road, panting, shaking. The silence of the woods loomed behind us, still and undisturbed. I turned, heart hammering. The forest looked normal, peaceful, like nothing had happened. Dax's voice was raw when he finally spoke. "Screw this place." I didn't argue. We packed up camp in record time, threw our gear in the truck, and drove for hours without stopping. Neither of us spoke for a long while, too shaken to process what had happened. When we finally did talk, we debated theories, mass hysteria on some kind of psychological phenomenon, or maybe just plain exhaustion messing with our heads. But deep down, we both knew something in those woods had been watching us, and it still was. Warafur, the thing that crawls at Dagger Ridge. I've been a hunter all my life, but after what I saw last November, I haven't slept well since. The wilderness has always been a second home to me. I know the rhythm of the trees, the hush of the snow, and the silent predators that lurk beyond sight. But nothing prepared me for what I encountered at Dagger Ridge. I always preferred to hunt alone. There's something pure about it. No voices to distract, no extra sets of footprints to betray your trail. Just you, the land, and the pursuit. My chosen hunting ground lay deep within the Blackthorn Wilderness, about 50 miles from the nearest town, well beyond where casual hikers or weekend campers dared to tread. That year, winter arrived early, and by November the temperature at night plummeted to nearly minus 30 degrees Celsius. I set up camp near a frozen creek, the snow crunching under my boots as I prepared for the week ahead. The first few days passed without incident, save for the occasional distant howl of a wolf or the rustling of unseen creatures beyond the tree line. On the fourth morning, I set out before dawn, tracking a herd of elk along a ridgeline that overlooked a snow-covered valley. As the first rays of sunlight stretched across the trees, something in the clearing below caught my eye. Movement, slow and unnatural. At first, I assumed it was an injured deer dragging itself through the snow. But when I lifted my binoculars, my breath caught in my throat. It was humanoid, but not human. The thing was hairless, its skin a sickly pale blue, blending eerily with the snow except for the grayish veins that spiderwebbed beneath its flesh. It crawled on all fours, but not like a person would. Its joints seemed misplaced, bending too far or not far enough, its limbs moving in an unsettling insect-like manner. I watched, frozen in place as it slithered toward the remains of a snowshoe hare. Without hesitation, it tore into the carcass, devouring it with bare hands and jagged teeth. It showed no sign of feeling the cold, no shivers, no visible breath, no hesitation as it pressed itself into the freezing snow. 15 minutes passed, though it felt like an eternity. The thing never looked my way. When it was done, it scuttled into the forest, disappearing among the trees like a phantom. I returned to camp in a daze. Logic told me it had to be a man, a deranged hermit, a lost soul suffering from some horrific condition. But deep down, I knew better. No human moves like that. No human eats like that. I considered leaving then and there, but my stubbornness kept me rooted. I had come to hunt, and I refused to let superstition drive me away. So the next day, I stayed closer to camp, determined to finish what I started. By midday, I managed to take down a young elk, though the unease in my gut never settled. As the sun dipped below the trees, I returned to my tent, dragging my kill behind me. That's when I noticed something was wrong. The entrance to my tent was open. I was sure I had closed it that morning. Raising my rifle, I called out. Silence answered. My pulse hammered in my ears as I stepped closer, and then it emerged, the thing, crawling headfirst from my tent. Up close, its face was almost human, but not quite. Its eyes reflected the dying light like an animal's, sharp, predatory, its mouth parted, revealing rows of jagged teeth. and in that moment, we understood each other. This was no lost man, no starving wanderer. This was something else. Panic seized me. My finger tightened on the trigger. The rifle roared, the shot echoing through the frozen trees. The creature flinched but didn't flee. It only stared, watching me, learning me. Then slowly it began to crawl backward into the underbrush, vanishing into the darkness just as it had before. I rushed into my tent, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Everything was as I had left it, except for my sleeping bag. It had been unzipped and laid open, as though waiting for something to crawl inside. That was it. I abandoned my gear, grabbed what I could carry, and hiked through the night, my headlamp barely cutting through the shadows. I never stopped, never looked back. Every time exhaustion threatened to slow me down, the image of that thing's face flashed through my mind, and fear pushed me forward. I haven't returned to Dagger Ridge since. I've scoured every legend, every local folktale, searching for an explanation. But nothing matches what I saw. Some nights I wake up shivering, convinced I hear something crawling just outside my bedroom window. And some part of me knows it never stopped watching. The first time I saw it, I was 12 years old. It happened during the dry season, deep in the remote wilderness of the Black Hollow Forest. My father had taken me on my first serious hunting trip, a rite of passage in our family. We were tracking wild boar, and with us was Rook, our loyal dog, a sleek black and tan shepherd mix, sharp as a blade and fearless as any warrior. He had been my companion since I was 7, and I couldn't imagine life without him. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the jagged peaks, we set up camp on a ridge overlooking a watering hole. My father, a man of few words, placed a hand on my shoulder. "Tonight, you become a hunter," he said, his face a mask of quiet pride. Rook was restless. He wasn't sniffing for prey. He was pacing, his ears twitching, his hackles raised. Something unseen, something unnatural, had put him on edge. "Quiet," my father whispered, but Rook's growling only grew louder. Then suddenly he bolted, racing towards the thick brush across the watering hole. "Rook, no!" I shouted, but he was gone. My father grabbed my arm, preventing me from chasing after him. "Stay here," he ordered. Then we heard it. Rook's barking turned frantic, a mix of rage and terror. Then came a sound I will never forget, a growl, but not from any animal I had ever heard. It was guttural, but high-pitched, layered with a rattling hiss that sent a chill through my spine. Then Rook let out a yelp, one of agony. My father flicked on his flashlight, the beam slicing through the darkness. What we saw will haunt me forever. A creature was crouched over Rook. It was hairless, its slick gray-green skin stretched tightly over an emaciated frame. Its back was lined with spiny, jagged protrusions, each quill-like and sharp. But its eyes were enormous, round and black as the abyss, reflecting our light like wet obsidian. Blood dripped from its elongated fingers, Rook's blood. For a single paralyzing moment, the thing turned its gaze upon us. Its mouth, previously unseen, split open, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. My father fumbled with his rifle, but his fingers trembled. "Run!" he ordered. I couldn't move. The thing let out another unholy screech and twitched, its body coiling as if preparing to lunge. Then my father grabbed me by the collar and dragged me backward. Only then did my legs remember how to move. We ran, tearing through the underbrush, the darkness thick around us. I didn't stop until I was shoved into the truck. My father jumped behind the wheel, started the engine with shaking hands. and floored it down the rocky path. "What was that?" I gasped, my chest heaving. My father, staring straight ahead, muttered only one word: "The Hollow Stalker." I had heard the stories. A predator of the old world, a spirit that hunted in the dark, preying on the unsuspecting. But those were just legends, weren't they? When we got home, my father told my mother we lost Rook to a cougar. He never spoke of what we really saw. Not to me, not to anyone. But in the weeks that followed, the villagers found livestock drained of blood, their bodies left eerily untouched aside from twin punctures at their throats. Decades have passed. I have owned other dogs, but I have never again taken one hunting. And though I still track game, I always return to my car before the sun sets. Because I know that out there, in the depths of the hollow, the stalker still hunts, and it never forgets a scent. Every autumn, since my sons were old enough to hold a rifle, we've carried on the family tradition of waterfowl hunting. This year was no different. James, now in his early 30s, and Tyler, just shy of 30, met me at our usual spot, a remote stretch of wetlands bordered by dense forest, far from prying eyes. Accompanied by our steadfast retriever, Boone, we set out before dawn, eager for a good hunt. By the time the sun crested the horizon, the morning mist had begun to lift, revealing a glassy lake dotted with our decoys. Boone paced in the reeds, barely containing his excitement as we settled in, shotguns ready. A flock of ducks materialized in the distance, their dark silhouettes slicing through the morning glow. Everything was playing out just as it had for decades. But then, something changed. As the flock approached, their descent suddenly became chaotic. Instead of gliding smoothly to the water, the birds plummeted as if their wings had been snatched from the air. They crashed into the lake with force, sending up splashes far too large for creatures their size. And then, silence. No flapping, no desperate attempts to take flight. Just floating, still shapes on the water's surface. Tyler frowned. "That ain't normal." James waved his hand. "Might have seen us. Give him a minute." But even Boone sensed something was off. The dog, usually eager to retrieve, stood frozen, ears back, tail stiff. "Boone, fetch," I commanded. He hesitated before leaping into the water, his strong strokes sending ripples toward the lifeless flock. He neared them, barking, snapping his jaws to flush them, but they wouldn't move. They simply floated, heads twitching in tiny, unnatural jerks. Then a sound tore through the air, a shriek, metallic and unearthly, like steel being dragged across stone. It came from somewhere high above, vibrating in our bones, rattling our chests. Boone yelped and turned back, paddling furiously toward shore. "What the hell is that?" James whispered, gripping his shotgun tighter. We all turned toward the sky just as a shadow swallowed the light. It wasn't a cloud. It wasn't a plane. It was alive. A creature, colossal in scale, soared over the treetops, its wings spread impossibly wide. The wings weren't feathered. They were leathery, translucent in the sunlight, webbed like those of a bat. Its serpentine body undulated as it moved, lined with jagged bony protrusions. But its head was something out of nightmare. Long, angular, reptilian, a maw full of needle-sharp teeth. And eyes, piercing golden eyes that locked onto us for one breathless moment. "Run!" I don't know who said it first, but suddenly we were all sprinting, water sloshing around our knees, gear abandoned. Boone darted ahead, his wet paws kicking up mud. The creature's screech rang out again, so loud it made my skull vibrate. It swooped low, wind from its wings flattening the reeds. I didn't dare look up. I just ran. The truck was in sight when I heard the snap of branches behind us, something landing, something heavy. We threw ourselves into the cab, slamming the doors as Boone clawed his way into the back seat. I jammed the keys into the ignition, hands shaking so violently I almost dropped them. The beast let out one final, ear-splitting shriek as I gunned the engine. We didn't stop driving until we reached the main road, miles away. James finally broke the silence, voice hoarse. "Did we all see the same thing?" Tyler swallowed hard. It looked like a damn dinosaur, a dragon or something. I kept my eyes on the road, unable to answer, because the truth was, I didn't have one. We never went back to that lake. We found a new hunting ground, one with more people around, because solitude, once a comfort, now felt like a death sentence, and some things, some creatures, aren't meant to be seen by men.